Cressida Dick, most senior police officer in the police service. She resigned on Thursday. Given her track record, was that the right thing for her to do?
I was really quite surprised by the resignation, Trevor. And my view on Cressida is she's led the Metropolitan Police with care, compassion, and candour. She's really generated great loyalty amongst the frontline troops, and in effect, she's been overtaken by a series of what I can only describe as catastrophic events. She was walking, wasn't she, an incredibly tough tightrope. So post the appalling killing of Sarah Everard and the erosion of public trust, she really needed to focus on rebuilding that trust, while at the same time kind of maintaining the confidence of her own staff. You know, the vast majority of the men and women working across the Met are getting up every day to do a great job for members of the public. But I think the scale of the events, so from Sarah Everard through to the photographs of Nicole Smallman and Bieber Henry, which was just a disgrace, I think the last straw was really the Charing Cross incident. I can only describe it as an abomination. The comments that we heard there, I've never heard the likes in any walk of life, let alone policing. And although Cressida had a plan, and I've looked at the plan, and I think it was a pretty good plan, the trouble was it wasn't moving at pace. And that's what led to the situation we found earlier on in the week, with her finding she had no option but to resign.
So do you think that the mayor, in the end, was right to say he no longer had confidence in her?
That's got to be a decision for him, and I know that's a kind of a get out of jail free kind of comment. But the issue that I think that he saw was that the reform wasn't happening at pace. The trouble, I think, that the mayor and now the Home Secretary, who leads on the appointment of the Met Commissioner, the problem that they now have is whoever the incoming commissioner is, they will have a very, very full inbox, and they will have precisely the same problems that Cressida was contending with to deal with. And the problem here, Trevor, is at the root of this is there is a real cultural issue in the Met that needs to be unpacked, unpicked, and dealt with. And we know that that's not going to happen overnight, but that needs to be at the top of the new commissioner's inbox. I think Cressida was a very talented leader. There are obviously many other talented police officers up and down the country. Will they do a better job than Cressida? Well, that remains to be seen, but she was really at the forefront of police leadership.
One of the things that has been said about this series of events is that the mayor spoke in his statement this week about the culture of misogyny, racism and homophobia. Some reports say it reminded him of the bad old days of police when he was growing up. Is that what a commissioner should really mostly be judged on, rather than whether they are catching bad people, stopping burglaries, stopping knife crime on the streets?
It's it's a great question as ever. The issue with public trust is not that it's a nice thing to have. It's essential, because in this country we police by consent, and when that trust erodes, the whole legitimacy of policing erodes as well. Whether that's in terms of people reporting to the police, whether that's in terms of people from communities that aren't properly represented within policing coming forward and joining the police. It is so much at the heart of all that the police do that it is right to focus on trust. But, you know, the other part of your question is, should the Met Commissioner be focusing on the day job too? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been a series of reports over the last week or so about the extent to which the police are actually serving the public well across the country. You know, I find it pretty dismal that only 5% of burglars are brought to justice, 1% of rapes end in conviction. I lead on violence against women and girls, or did in my former role, and I was astonished that 3/4 of domestic abuse-related crime reported to the police was being closed down early before the offender is brought to justice on the grounds of evidential difficulties. There's 1.6 million crimes of domestic abuse a year. Trevor, you do the math. How many of our victims are being left in that position where they've reported to the police, but actually they've not seen an outcome which they think is just and fair. So quite right in terms of your question. We've got to look at both sides of this. Do the day job well. Police use their powers well. Keep the Londoners safe, but also absolutely rebuilding trust is central to all of this.
Well, you've spoken eloquently about the day job, and the data, you've just given some of it, suggests that actually things are getting even worse, and that, as you've quoted the figures on rape, which seem extraordinarily low, on knife crime, the proportion of offenders given immediate custodial sentences decreased to 31%. But from 2020 to 2021. What is going wrong?
I think there's a whole range of factors. The police are really busy. There is no denying that. And certainly when I was Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, we saw a massive increase in crime going onto the books, not necessarily because there was more crime, but the police were getting a whole lot better at reporting it. I think in some forces, there's been a tendency with all of this busyness to look for easy routes to close crimes down rather than to have to investigate them rapidly. And I'm always quite depressed when I hear about crimes going into what's called a crime resolution desk, which is where someone has a quick look at the crime, works out if there's any leads to follow, was there any CCTV, was there any witnesses, and makes a really rapid decision then not to investigate further. The police are there to do very basic things in policing: turn up quick, listen to the victim and take what they say at face value and believe them, and do a proper investigation. Do house-to-house inquiries, look for CCTV, not push it all back onto the victim to do all that themselves. And if the police aren't turning up rapidly, that golden hour, it's a bit of an old cliche, but that golden hour of actually being able to gather that evidence, to build a case, to bring the offender to justice, to some extent, again, a cliche, but back to some of the basics in policing across England and Wales, I think.
Let's finally, if I may, just come back to this point of trust that you spoke about. Part of it is getting the day job done, but part of it, presumably, is also behaving properly. Half of the police employees who committed gross misconduct in the last 3 years were not dismissed. Of 118 cases where a standards breach was proven by disciplinary panels, only 55 led to the sack, according to an analysis of figures by the Independent Office for Police Conduct. And this is not just the Met, this is across the board. This is just not good enough, is it?
No, it's not. The public won't understand it. I don't understand it. It makes no sense. I think the whole complexity of police regulations around discipline and misconduct needs a complete overhaul. I hope the various reviews that are ongoing will completely look at this, because if people transgress in this position of power and trust, and this is what this is in policing, then they do need to be brought to book. And I don't think the public, I don't know the details behind Charing Cross, but I think it's hard for the public to fathom that two of those officers, who were at the very least bystanders in that abomination of that discussion on WhatsApp, have now been promoted. What sort of message is that sending out across the organisation? So we definitely need to have a look at misconduct. We also, Trevor, need to look at the type of person that we want to see within policing. What are their traits? What's their ambitions? Why are they joining policing in the first place? And when they have joined, what are the police doing to make sure, if there are rotten apples, that the counter-corruption measures in place are sufficient to be able to root them out?